2023 has begun with an industry-shaking wrestling war. No, not between WWE and AEW. Not between Ryback and that guy who told him to retire his mum.
And my big guy balls.
It's WWE versus its disgraced original founder, Vince McMahon. Because McMahon is set to unleash a full-scale attack on the company that kicked him out, to seize back control and then potentially kill it altogether. In short, yes, it is the NWO Lethal Dose of Poison promo he cut back in 2002. Make sure to super kick that subscribe button and enable notifications to always on so we can keep you up to date with all the crazy twists and turns while I explain the full story of Vince's last mad plan.
Support WrestleTalk!
The beginning of the end for Vince McMahon, or so we thought, began in April 2022, when the WWE board began investigating a $3 million hush money payment Vince had made to a former employee of the company. McMahon claims the relationship that was consensual. To explain the concept of a board of directors in a publicly traded company, which is the thing that was doing the investigation, as this will be very important later on, it's a group of very experienced people who hold those running said company to account. The board is elected by the shareholders, who are parties that have bought stock in the company, as a way to make sure the company is being well run to protect their investments. The board is supposed to make sure the strategy is sound, that growth is always growing, and, on a good day, that none of the executive team are sexually exploiting their positions in the company. The board's investigation was made public 2 months later, when the Wall Street Journal revealed what was happening to the world. Their article was well researched and sourced, and posed the question, who was the person who leaked the investigation to the press? With a situation so delicate, only a select few would know. There was speculation that someone on WWE's board of directors, made up of just over 10 people, was the source of the leak. The next 5 weeks saw the investigation uncover multiple other non-disclosure agreements related to sexual misconduct claims against McMahon, totaling $12 million. But like Al Capone, it seemed to be the accounting that really did him in. Those payments might have been incorrectly filed for in the company financials. Big corporate no-no, and the SEC started to sniff around. Vince was dragged, kicking and screaming, from his position. He had to be talked out of addressing the allegations in a promo on SmackDown. He started to appear on every episode of main roster TV, defiantly showing, "I'm still here!" He initially stepped down from his roles as CEO and chairman, as it was now publicly known he was being investigated, but clung on to his position of head of creative. But then, on July 22nd, 2022, he announced, "At 77, time for me to retire. Thank you, WWE Universe. Then, now, forever, together." #WWE, #thankful. Well, that was easy. WWE finally got rid of Vince after over 40 years, and it only took 5 weeks. He didn't even start a podcast afterwards, or keep tweeting cryptic negs at Triple H's booking, who subsequently took over for him in creative. The only thing we heard from Vince for 5 months was a photo of him having a nice dinner in New York. That was easy. Was it balls? It was always weird that Vince just disappeared into the night. One of the most ruthless, cutthroat players in all of business, not just wrestling, was never just going to bow out with a tweet. And just like the end of a video game, when you think you've defeated the main boss in a relatively simple 10-minute fight, for it to come back in giant Megazord form for a ridiculously difficult finale that takes you 8 weeks to complete, yes, I am calling Vince McMahon Ganondorf. McMahon appears to have spent those 5 months powering up, recruiting allies, and plotting. That's the literal word used by the Wall Street Journal to describe this. Plotting. Like he really is an evil mastermind to take WWE back. In December, another Wall Street Journal was published that revealed 2 women who alleged that McMahon sexually assaulted them were seeking damages. One of them was former wrestling referee Rita Chatterton, who had publicly accused Vince of raping her 3 decades ago. She was seeking $11.75 million. This was made possible because New York State opened a 1-year window that allows victims to file sex abuse lawsuits based on decades-old claims. It seemed like it was just getting worse for Vince, so he thought this was the perfect time to try and make a return. The Journal article noted that McMahon has told people that he intends to make a comeback at WWE after feeling he received bad advice from people close to him to step down. Apparently, he believed the allegations and investigations would have blown over had he stayed. Then, on January 5th, The Wall Street Journal again, who presumably definitely have their sources very high up in WWE, reported that Vince returning to the company was very much on his New Year's resolutions, packaged around the idea that he is the only one that can pull off a big-time sale of the business. Apparently, following the last Journal article noting he intended to make a comeback, Vince sent a letter to the board detailing his desire to return to help guide a strategic review process. He put forward his belief that the media landscape is changing at the exact same time the TV rights for WWE's flagship shows Raw and SmackDown are up for renegotiation. After all, he was a big part in the last time the media landscape changed, with the launch of the WWE Network, the first big-time IP-specific streaming platform of that era. He believes that broadcast or streaming companies now want to go one step further. They don't just want to pay $1 billion for the rights to air Raw or SmackDown for 5 years. They want to pay outright to just own all of WWE so they're secured in the long haul. This is definitely a trend in media, facilitated by the likes of Disney, Amazon and Apple, all making big-time IP investments to one-up traditional broadcasters. And it's an idea that WWE has already dabbled with under Vince, licensing the WWE Network to Peacock for 5 years. Vince reportedly told the board that unless he has direct involvement as executive chairman from the outset of a strategic review, he won't support or approve any media rights deal or sale. Taking morality out of this is actually a really good plan, which is why it's a genius bit of media manipulation for Vince to smuggle his return inside of. The sale of WWE is a big Trojan horse wheeling its way into the boardroom, the media, and most importantly, the stock market, which hides in its head a disgraced, hugely controversial former chairman driving it from the inside. Making Vince's reinstatement inseparable from the sale of WWE puts the board in an enormously difficult position. They're meant to protect shareholders' interests, but the shareholders' interests can mostly be summed up as make all the money. And now Vince is the only way we can make them the mostest amount of money. And anyway, it might be legally impossible to stop him. The board reportedly responded to Vince's letter where he said he wanted to come back saying, no, that's a really bad idea. Because we're trying to downplay all the massive legal and securities issues you've created. Because the US government have launched an inquiry into all those payments. The board did say they would welcome working with Vince on the sales strategy, but they unanimously agreed that Mr. McMahon's return to the business wouldn't be in the shareholders' best interest. So there's only one thing you can do: change who's on the board. You see, while Vince only owns about 39% of WWE shares, he has very smartly retained control of over 80% of its voting power. In business, you can have loads of different kinds of shares, which have different special abilities, like cards in a game of Pokemon. Some mean you get paid a portion of the profits every year, but that's it. Others mean you benefit financially only if there's a sale. And some just have the power for you to put your dick on the table and tell everyone else what to do. So making up the rear end of Vince's Trojan horse are the executives he fired just before the pandemic. It's like a Royal Rumble nostalgia return for boring people in suits. Former CFO with a forehead full of financials, George Barrios, and former Chief Revenue and Marketing Officer, Michelle Wilson. Ironically, Vince ruthlessly fired them 3 years ago because they wouldn't support his plan to sell the rights to the WWE Network, and were replaced by Nick Khan, who did. And now they're coming back on board to help sell the whole company. If you've seen Succession, picture the self-interested non-family members, Frank and Jerry. The Wall Street Journal notes that McMahon, Barrios, and Wilson being forced back onto the board will require 3 current directors to vacate their positions. Who gets removed will be very interesting, as you would expect Vince to get rid of those he perceives as his enemies, and perhaps even those he suspects of leaking the investigation in the first place. It's unknown how this will affect Stephanie McMahon and Nick Khan's roles as co-CEOs. Vince McMahon announced all of his intentions in a press release through the PR company August Strategic Communications. This is a very important detail. This is not a statement from WWE. It's from Vince McMahon at WWE from the outside. Make no mistake about it, this is the corporate equivalent of the first public shot in a war. In the press release, Vince is quoted saying, "The only way for WWE to fully capitalize on this opportunity is for me to return as executive chairman and support the management team in the negotiations for our media rights, and to combine that with a review of strategic alternatives. My return will allow WWE, as well as any transaction counterparties, to engage in these processes knowing they will have the support of the controlling shareholder." Which is PR talk for, "You can't do this without me, bitches!" The board believe Vince is bad for the shareholders. Vince believes he is good for the shareholders. That will be the narrative war waged. And going by the cold, hard stock market, designed to only care about financial performance, it worked. WWE's stock price rose over 10% following the news. This is very unlikely a boost due to Vince himself, though. When McMahon announced his retirement in July, the stock price actually rose 9%. Following the December report he was planning to return, share value suffered a dip. Going by those correlations, Vince's name is bad for shareholders. What isn't, though, is WWE being sold for loads of money. The stock price rise is because of that, not because of Vince, which is why it was such a smart strategy to link the two. But will the benefits of a potential sale outweigh the risks of bringing McMahon back in? There's the 2 sexual abuse cases currently against him, which he denies. There's the SEC scrutiny of how the NDA money was paid. There's advertisers, because Stephanie McMahon mentioned in the last investors call that some partners had paused their campaigns with WWE in light of the Vince situation. And, of course, unfortunately, at the bottom of that pile is the most important thing to us: the quality of WWE programming. Since Vince left and Triple H took over, the standard of Raw and SmackDown has improved dramatically. For now, McMahon's return appears to be purely corporate and not on-screen creative. But Charlotte Flair did return on SmackDown to immediately win the title, which is the most Vince McMahon piece of booking ever. The truth is, he might not be able to help himself once back in the company, which is apparently a big concern behind the scenes. Fightful is reporting many WWE employees were left in the dark about Vince's plot and were shocked by the news, finding out online as it broke rather than through any internal update from the company. One talent said there could be roster uproar if the hugely liked regime of Triple H, Stephanie and Nick Khan are removed. Spare a thought for William Regal and all this, who left AEW to work under his best mate Triple H, for the evil overlord to potentially scrap that under a month later. 2023 has begun the way 2022 finished, by being f***ing mental. Watch our breakdown of the whole of wrestling in 2022 now.
Because Kendrick was announced for a match with Jon Moxley on AEW Dynamite, but comments he made in interviews in 2011 and 2013 resurfaced. These touched on things such as the moon being a hollow space station for aliens, reptilian people being the global elite who live underground, the sun not actually being hot,